Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual public information meeting for the Braddock and Old Lee Safety and Operational Improvement Study. Many of you likely attended our in-person public information meeting back in February, and this virtual public information meeting serves as follow-up to that meeting. My name is Andy Beecher, and I am VDOT's Preliminary Engineering Manager for Fairfax and Arlington counties. Also with us this evening, we have Supervisor Smith from the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. We're expecting Delegates Helmer and Delaney, as well as Senator Marsden. And also, I believe Tom Parker from Supervisor Letourneau's office is on as well. I also wanted to mention that we have Nick Roper, our VDOT Assistant District Administrator for Project Development, as well as Tom Bashadny, Director of Fairfax County Department of Transportation. We also have various members from our project team, as well as Will Steinhilber from FCDOT, who is also going to be presenting this evening. Moving on now to slide 3. At this time, and before I go over our agenda, I'd like to turn the floor over to Supervisor Smith and Tom Bashadny, who'd like to say a few words. Supervisor Smith?
Thank you, Andy. I want to thank everybody that's on this meeting with us for getting some information about the project. Just as a simple reminder, VDOT's looking at this because of safety and operational issues at Braddock Road and Old Lee. And it is a study right now. There hasn't been funding for this. The only action that the Board of Supervisors has taken is to submit the project to be considered in the Smart Scale application project. And as you'll hear, and Mr. Bashadny is going to share more information about the details. So it is an ongoing process. There's opportunities for the public to be involved and participate in the process, and you'll be able to learn about that tonight. But thank you for being here.
Thank you, Supervisor Smith. This is Tom Bashadny with the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and thank you to all of you for participating this evening. As Supervisor Smith mentioned, the Board of Supervisors has approved a Smart Scale application. Smart Scale is a funding program operated by the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's a competitive process, and in that approval, the Braddock and Old Lee project that we'll be discussing tonight was ranked priority 6 of 9 for Fairfax County. However, it is a competitive process, and we did need to select an alternative to be able to submit the application. The application is fairly detailed, and it does ask a lot of questions that can be only answered if you have some idea of the details of what that project might be. I will note that 2 years ago, the last round of Smart Scale, there were actually $7.4 billion worth of requests for only $856 million worth of funding. So it is very competitive. This process is only undertaken every 2 years. So if we did not submit an application for Braddock and Old Lee this year, it would not be an option for us until 2022. So that's why we wanted to move forward and make a submission this year. We won't know until June of next year which projects the Commonwealth Transportation Board has selected to fund. We'll have some indication, a draft recommendation probably in the April timeframe. And if this project is funded, those funds would not be available until July of 2025. So it's quite a bit of time between now and when funding for this project actually might be available. And at that point, VDOT would be able to go in more detail on the engineering for the project and also undertake all the environmental studies and environmental planning that needs to be done. And there would be a public involvement process that would include public meetings and a formal design public hearing. So we are really at the very beginning of this process, even though we've presented 5 alternatives back in February, and we'll be discussing those this evening. We're a long ways away from actually beginning the formal design of a project. So with that, I want to turn it back to Andy Beecher to walk through the agenda for this evening and also conduct the presentation. Thank you, Supervisor Smith, and thank you, Andy, as well.
Okay, thank you, Tom and Supervisor Smith. Moving on to slide number 4. This next slide shows our agenda for this evening. Following the instructions for how we will conduct the question and answer portion of this meeting, we'll go over some of the background material from our previous public information meeting. We'll also discuss the features of the staff preferred alternative as identified back in February. And then Will Steinhilber will cover the selected alternative for the study. And then I will conclude the presentation with next steps and an opportunity for questions. Moving on to slide 5. The question and answer period will proceed as follows. When you are ready to ask your question, please expand the question box and then type the question in the box. And then when we get to the Q&A portion of the meeting, a staff member will orally relay your question to the project team. Questions will be addressed in the order that they were received. Some other general notes for the meeting. All participants' audio will be muted during the meeting. And if you do happen to get disconnected, please do attempt to rejoin the meeting. I would also note that the meeting is being recorded for future reference. Now on to slide 6. The next several slides will look familiar to those of you who participated in our February meeting. This slide here shows an overview of the area with the Braddock and Pleasant Valley roundabout to the west, which was completed in 2016. Then moving east, we have the S-curve, and finally the Braddock and Old Lee intersection. And as I mentioned in February, both the S-curve and the Braddock-Old Lee intersection each present safety and operational challenges under current conditions. With the S-curve, we have recurring crashes and trucks getting stuck on the curve due to the grade difference. And then at the Braddock and Old Lee intersection, we have crashes as well as queuing and delays. Now on to slide 7. And this slide shows the crash history in greater detail, covering the period from 2006 to the present, as well as the number of stuck trucks from 2010 to 2017. In total, during these respective time periods, we had 115 crashes and 18 stuck trucks in the area of the S-curve. We also had 34 crashes at the Braddock and Old Lee intersection, and moving further north on Old Lee, 27 crashes at the curve as you head towards Stonecroft Boulevard. Our next slide is slide 8. From a congestion standpoint, in the morning we have a heavy eastbound flow on Braddock, with many vehicles looking to make the eastbound left onto Old Lee Road. This leads to queuing and delays as vehicles wait for an acceptance gap to make their left turn maneuver. Next on slide 9, you can see in the evenings, many of those same vehicles are making the return trip on southbound Old Lee to make a right turn. In addition, there are some vehicles traveling southbound on Old Lee looking to make a left turn on Braddock. And this can exacerbate the situation given the approach configuration that we currently have, and often leads to additional queuing and delays. So as you can see, based on both the crash and congestion data, this location has an existing safety and operational problem that needs to be addressed. Our next slide, slide 10. Given those safety and operational concerns, the study team looked at multiple alternatives to improve the Braddock and Old Lee intersection in conjunction with realigning the S-curve. And each of the alternatives that I'm going to show you focus in on the intersection itself. I would note that none of the alternatives that I'm going to cover have been through an environmental process at this point. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this will occur once a project is funded and preliminary engineering has commenced. And we'll also discuss this in a little bit greater detail later in the presentation. Getting on to the first alternative, this alternative adds a traffic signal to the intersection without turn lanes. And while this would be the least impactful in each of the categories that we examined, which includes right-of-way, utilities, bridge impacts, hydraulic, and environmental, Our analysis showed that it had poor operational performance with continued queuing and delay into the future. Moving on to slide 11, our next alternative, alternative 2, added both a signal and a 200-foot southbound turn lane. With this option, we did see an improvement in operations overall, but without geometric improvements along Braddock, the eastbound AM queues still persisted. And impacts increased with the addition of the turn lane, with right-of-way required from Rock Hill District Park and impacts to utilities on the north side of Braddock Road. Stormwater management and environmental impacts would also need to be considered. So moving on to our next slide, slide 12. Alternative 3 builds on Alternative 2 and adds an 1,100-foot jug handle lane to accommodate eastbound left turns, essentially providing an at-grade ramp to allow jug handle users to make the left turn indirectly. And those who attended our previous meeting in February will recall that this alternative was the staff preferred alternative. And while this alternative does offer fair to good performance from an operational perspective, the jug handle has moderate right-of-way and utility impacts and would potentially require additional hydraulic and environmental studies. Moving on to slide 13. For alternative 4, instead of the jug handle, this option incorporates two 300-foot eastbound left turn lanes. And while this alternative results in even better operational performance, its right-of-way and utilities impacts are high. And it also impacts the bridge over Cub Run, either through widening or replacement. It would require as well a hydraulic study and roadway embankment protection, as well as a stormwater management facility, and would have higher environmental impacts. Moving on to our next slide, number 14. The last alternative that we discussed in February is the roundabout option. It includes a single lane roundabout with bypass lanes in each direction. And this is projected to have good operational performance through 2040. The impacts, however, are high and are similar in all categories to Alternative 4, but with more impacts to park property. Our next slide, slide 15. For those of you who attended the meeting in February, you may recall that VDOT developed a decision matrix to facilitate choosing the staff preferred alternative. This slide shows a slightly updated version of that matrix, with each alternative receiving a rating for its operational performance, safety, and impacts in the various categories shown. It also includes the implementation schedule for each of the alternatives, as well as costs. Now, as discussed, Alternative 1 had minimal impacts, but it did have poor operational performance. Alternative 2 had slightly improved performance, but had more impacts, primarily from the southbound right turn lane. Alternative 3 showed fair to good performance with additional impacts on the south side of Braddock, and alternatives 4 and 5 had good performance, but with additional impacts, including environmental. It also had longer implementation schedules and higher cost. So based on this analysis and the matrix exercise, staff designated Alternative 3 as the preferred alternative. Moving on to slide 16. Looking at the staff preferred alternative in greater detail, on this slide you can see an updated sketch of the combined project, including the S-curve. The sketch is broken into two halves, with the S-curve shown in the upper left corner and the Braddock Old Lee improvements shown in the lower right. Again, for the S-curve portion of the project, the curve would be realigned to address the existing issue of crashes and stuck trucks. It would also add a shared use path connection along the north side of the road. And then on the eastern end of the project would be the improvements at Braddock and Old Lee, including the jug handle and southbound right turn lane. And lastly, the shared use path would continue to Old Lee. Moving on to slide 17. Before we actually discuss the selected alternative for the study, I did want to take a few minutes to go over some of the feedback that we received at the February public information meeting. I will say, in general, feedback was somewhat mixed in terms of the alternatives with no clear consensus. But there were a number of specific items that came up that we did want to address this evening. So during that meeting, some of you expressed a desire to see the long-term comprehensive plan alignment for Braddock and Old Lee implemented. And there are some very significant challenges associated with this option. First of all, cost. We estimate that this project would cost anywhere from $70 to $80 million, and there are currently no funds allocated to it. Second, we know that the comp plan alignment will have its own environmental impacts requiring evaluation. And we would also note that the revised alignment calls for 4 lanes for the new alignment. And lastly, the county has many other transportation priorities with limited funding availability. And so as such, the county has to find a balance with its transportation priorities and its available funding. However, we do want to note in terms of the comp plan alignment, this remains on the plan and it wouldn't be precluded from future implementation. Okay, some of you also asked about the possibility of adding a single southbound right turn lane. And unfortunately, the single right turn lane, in an unsignalized condition would mean that not all of the safety and operational issues would be addressed. And we typically do try to be as efficient as we can with our resources. And this would mean that we would essentially have to come back again to address issues we already know are present. Also, it's very likely that the right turn lane would not get fully utilized, as we would expect continued queuing could block access to that turn lane. Another area of concern that was expressed was the potential for impacts to public and private property. And again, we need to keep in mind that this is a study only at this time. Any proposed project that might come out of this is unfunded. Now, if a project were to be funded, such as through the Smart Scale program, once the design had been initiated, the project team would look to minimize impacts as the design is developed and refined through additional engineering, but also through the public input process where there would be additional public meetings and, as Tom mentioned, the public hearing. Another concern raised was that of the potential for increased traffic from Loudoun County. For this, I want to again emphasize that the potential project that might come from this study would address congestion and safety issues that we know are already present. And we also just want to mention that as proposed, this particular alternative would not add through lanes to Braddock Road. But I also want to make clear that Braddock Road is a public road and there are no restrictions to regional traffic. And this would be the case, for any other jurisdiction traveling to another, as in Fairfax residents using regional roads to enter, say, Arlington or some other jurisdiction. Okay, so moving on to slide 18. The last area that we wanted to discuss with you all is the concern expressed about the need for environmental studies. And so in this particular subject area, I want to emphasize that should a potential project from this study get funded, consistent with all of our VDOT projects, the environmental studies would begin once preliminary design had been initiated. And those studies would include, but are not limited to, evaluation of water resources as well as threatened and endangered species. Also, throughout the environmental study process, VDOT would coordinate with all appropriate federal, state, and local agencies. And we would look to avoid and minimize impacts to resources to the greatest extent practicable. And finally, the results of those studies will be posted on the Future Projects website with the opportunity for public input. Our next slide is slide 19, and at this time I'm going to turn the presentation over to Will Steinhilber from Fairfax County Department of Transportation to discuss the selected alternative. Will?
All right, thank you, Andy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As Andy mentioned, my name is Will Steinhuber, and I work for the Fairfax County Department of Transportation in the Capital Projects and Traffic Engineering Division. After the public information meeting feedback, the state and the county transportation departments came together to select a preferred alternative. While selecting this preferred alternative, we were trying to maximize safety and operational performance while minimizing the costs and impacts of the project. We came to a joint staff decision of proceeding with the jug handle design for the smart scale application for funding for the project. It's important to note that, as has already been mentioned, this is not the final design, and as we get further into the design process, we will refine the design further. In total, the cost would end up being approximately $14.6 million for the combined jug handle and S-curve improvements. Thank you very much for your time, and I will turn it back over to Mr. Beecher.
Okay, thanks, Will. Our next slide is slide number 20. And in terms of next steps, as you know, a project from this study is not currently funded, and VDOT does not have discretionary funding for construction projects. Fairfax County, as has been described, has elected to apply for smart scale funds from the Commonwealth Transportation Board. For those of you who aren't familiar with smart scale, it is essentially the primary source of funding for localities to apply for state and federal funds from the Commonwealth. The projects are scored based on an objective and outcome-based process that is intended to be transparent and ensure accountability. And after the scoring and prioritization process occurs, the CTB actually holds a public hearing in the spring. And so next year it'll be April, May 2021. And through that public hearing, anyone has the opportunity to provide public comment on the potential smart scale projects. And then projects are, after the public hearing, selected by the CTB for funding. That will occur in June of 2021. And then, lastly, I did want to note again that smart scale is a very competitive process. And so application to the state for funds does not mean that they will necessarily be received. And as Tom had noted earlier, in round 3, there were $7.4 billion in requests with only $856 million available. So continuing on, smart scale funds for the current cycle are anticipated to be programmed starting in FY26, which is July of 2025. And again, the next application cycle will not occur for another 2 years, so that would be in 2022. If the application were to be funded, preliminary engineering would be initiated upon receipt of those programmed funds, again, starting in FY26. And there would be, once again, multiple opportunities for additional public engagement. So, clearly the conversation does not end with the completion of this study. At the time of the initiation of design, there will be further outreach in the form of public information meetings, as well as a public hearing at a minimum. And moving on to slide 21. So there are multiple ways to submit your comments. You can email us at the meetingcomments@vdot.virginia.gov address. You can also mail those comments to me at VDOT's Northern Virginia District Office, which is 4975 Alliance Drive in Fairfax. And you can also comment or ask questions tonight at the virtual meeting or online at the study web page. And that is at virginiadot.org/Braddock and Old Lee. And our next slide is slide 22. So once again, if you wish to make a comment or ask a question tonight, as a reminder, when you are ready to ask that question, please go ahead and expand the question box and then type the question into the box. And once we get started, a staff member will relay your question to the team. And again, questions will be addressed in the order that they're received. We are planning to try and wrap up the Q&A portion of the meeting around 8:30 tonight, depending on how many questions we have. And again, if for some reason we don't get to your question tonight, we will be following up with answers to your questions via email. And before I actually get started with the Q&A, I do understand that Delegate Helmer has joined us, and he may want to make a few comments. Are we ready to let Delegate Helmer speak?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I just wanted to thank the staff for the presentation. I know you all have been working hard. This is a critical safety issue, and one we definitely need to address. So wanted to thank you for all the hard work. I also have heard quite a bit from the community, and I know there's a tremendous number of concerns about the design feature. And so I'm looking forward to hearing questions and listening in, and also hope in the context of those answers, there'll be a few things that the team is able to address. Specifically, I think there's a lot of questions, and I'm trying to understand, and I know my staff has been working with the team and would love to understand a little bit better why one of the alternatives that was looked at wasn't bringing a road through Rock Hill District Park, which is not the full comprehensive plan approach, but is aligned with the comprehensive plan. And so I'd be really interested to hear why that wasn't part of the analysis. Would love to understand. I know you mentioned there's been a lot of public feedback. Well, certainly our office has heard a tremendous amount, and would love to know the changes that have been made, or the thought process, how that has changed in response to the public feedback. And then lastly, I hope the team can address too the analysis results matrix. I see a lot of colors there, but I don't actually see any footnotes or links to what's behind that analysis. So, it's interesting that there's only one option that doesn't have any red. And so that just, it's interesting to understand what defined those different characteristics, what made red or amber or green, and what was the analysis behind that as you guys thought about the option. So really looking forward to the discussion, hearing more and listening in, and hope we're able to work with the community to address some concerns and also get to the end state of addressing the major safety issues on this road. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. And Sarah, I think we can go ahead with the Q&A portion.
All right, great. So good evening again, and thank you all for joining us. We recognize that this is a little bit of a different setup from how we usually host public meetings, so thank you for bearing with us during this time. We will begin the question and answer session now. My name is Genevieve Rubrecht. I will facilitate the questions. I'll read the questions that we received prior to tonight's meeting via phone and email, and then we will also go through the questions that we're receiving tonight. Andy, our project manager, will either answer the question or direct it to the appropriate panel member. If our panel members can just remain on mute until you're speaking, that will help eliminate any audio feedback. So we have a couple of comments or questions that we received prior to the meeting. The first one is, can you link the bike/walk trail where it stops near Old Lee Road in Braddock to the trail at Pleasant Forest and Braddock Road?
So Sarah, I believe that our desire is to try and make connections on either end of that trail so that it is completely usable and provides connectivity to other trails. Not all the details of that have been fleshed out at that point, and that is something that we would address further once we actually got into design.
Okay, and the next question is, Please don't add a traffic light at Braddock Road and Old Lee Road. It will only slow traffic. A large roundabout would be better. Why not do a large roundabout?
Yeah, and I will respond to this initially, and then if anyone from the study team wants to chime in on the specifics, they can. But I would just say that what we found was that the staff preferred alternative offered pretty good operational performance in the time frame that we were looking at as more of an interim type improvement. And we did not feel that it was necessary to implement something such as the roundabout in order to get the type of performance that we were looking for. Now, Tim Ramey, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to add to that, but please feel free.
Well, Andy, yes, this is Tim Ramey. I'm the project manager for the design, and we did look at the roundabout as one of the 5 alternatives, which had the largest footprint and largest environmental impacts. The larger we make that roundabout, the more impacts and the more park property would be taken, and we didn't see the need for that larger roundabout to look at the improvement of the safety and operational features for the roundabout that we had as one of the alternatives.
Yeah, that's a good point, Tim. I think, once again, what we were trying to do was strike a balance in the alternative that we selected. And by that, I mean, a balance between the need that we have out there in terms of safety and operations, but also the cost and also potential impacts to not just the adjacent properties, but also the environment and other features out there. So again, that was kind of what was driving that choice.
Thank you both. We received a couple of comments asking about participation tonight. So I'll give you the 2 that are related to each other. Why can't we participate in this meeting? This should be more mutual and collaborative. And the second one that's related to that is, why can't we speak to you about this? I'd like a public meeting to have this conversation, not just you guys telling us what we're going to do.
Well, it is an interactive forum. We have the written question format, and what we found is that does help to make the Q&A process a little bit more efficient in terms of getting through as many questions as we can in a short time period. And I know there are a lot of questions out there, and so we do want to try and get through as many as we can. And then also, it avoids some of the audio issues that you can typically hear when everyone has an open mic. So appreciate the question, but that's the rationale there.
And Andy, this is Tom Bashadny, if I might. There still will be opportunities for public meetings. If this project is funded, hopefully we'll be beyond the pandemic and the restrictions that places on us, and we will be able to have in-person public meetings on this project going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
All right, the next question, I would like to know what, if any, environmental studies have been conducted on this project. I do not think there should be any decision on a project until such studies have been done.
Okay, and I'm just going to go back to our slide, that's slide number 18, where we talked about the environmental studies. And so again, what we have done to date is a study only. It's not yet a project. And because of that, to date, we've not conducted environmental studies. That is typically done once we initiate a project, a funded project, and have started preliminary design. And so, that process will occur, regardless. Once we have a funded project, that will occur. And we will look at all these items that are identified on the slide. We're going to evaluate the water resources, threatened and endangered species. We're going to coordinate with all the appropriate agencies at the federal, state, and local level. We're going to avoid and minimize those impacts to resources. And we're also going to be transparent in that we're going to post those environmental studies on our website and allow folks to comment on those. So, nothing's been skipped or forgotten. It's just that we're not at that stage yet.
Okay, the next question. Since the potential for this is at least 5 years away, is there a way to at least add a right turn lane where Old Lee Road meets Braddock Road at the stop sign?
Yeah, and that's something that I know has come up before. And, one of the concerns there is that, as I said, when we try and address these issues that we discover, we try and make sure that we address all of the issues at once and be most efficient in terms of the use of taxpayer dollars. And our analysis has shown that a right turn lane by itself is just not going to be enough to solve the issues out there. And so that's why we're trying to proceed with a project that, while it is interim, it would successfully address all the issues that we're seeing out there right now, as opposed to just one and perhaps not as effectively.
Next question. COVID-19 has drastically changed our lifestyles, with many companies now determining that employees working at home are just as productive and the companies are saving money with downsizing offices. This is a trend. Before destroying the environment, why doesn't this study reevaluate the traffic patterns before spending $16 million?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I certainly understand where they're coming from in the current environment. And I will say that VDOT, of course, has been monitoring traffic very closely since the start of the pandemic. And what they've seen is that while there was a sharp drop in traffic at the early stages of the pandemic, it has been steadily increasing since about mid-April. Now, I don't know where that stands right now, but we do think that once the pandemic is resolved, just based on the data that we've seen so far, we are going to see traffic volumes return to close to what they were, if not more. That doesn't mean things couldn't change over time, because absolutely people are teleworking more and more. I'm teleworking myself tonight. But that's a good question. But we think as of right now that we're going to see a continued building of traffic.
How are these options viable when you still need so many considerable more studies?
Sarah, I think someone was trying to speak there.
Yeah, Andy, this is Nick Roper. I just wanted to add to the last question that updating the traffic study and traffic numbers would be one of the first things that would be undertaken if the project is funded and it gets underway.
Yeah, so Nick's point there is that we will be revisiting the numbers once we get into design at that point. Okay, sorry, Sarah. Your question again?
The question is, how are these viable options when you still need to do considerable more studies?
Well, this is pretty much standard procedure and process when we're looking at a new project. I mean, first you come up with some concepts and you look at them from a higher level, just to try and get a general idea as to what works and what doesn't work. And once you get that narrowed down to what you think is a viable option, assuming you can get funding to move that forward, that's when you do the more rigorous analysis that you're talking about there, and would provide some additional answers in terms of environmental impacts and the like.
And Andy, this is Tom Bashani. Just to follow up on that, in order to prepare a competitive application for the smart scale process, you really need to have some idea of a particular concept that you're trying to implement. There are a number of criteria that need to be responded to, and the only way that you can do that in a reasonable way is to have at least a concept of the project that you're doing. And then, so what we've done is we've used the work that VDOT's prepared to this point to prepare that application and answer those questions, recognizing that once we get into design of the project, assuming it's funded, that a number of the features of the project will be refined, and the final project that is ultimately permitted and all that may look very different than what we have today.
Thanks,
Thank you
Tom.
both. The next question says, I have no idea whether this number of accidents is significant or not. What does 115 crashes or 34 crashes over a 15-year period mean? This does not seem like that much.
Well, I do think to a certain extent that's a matter of perspective. But you know, I think it is strongly indicative of issues that are experienced at the S-curve itself. And then also, and that's for obvious reasons. I mean, you have that sharp curve there and the grade, which can cause problems for both vehicles in the winter, and also the trucks that occasionally get stuck there. It's a long-standing issue that you know, I think needs to be addressed. And then if you look at Braddock and Old Lee, you know, some of the things that we're seeing there, a result of folks not necessarily feeling like they have an acceptable gap to make a turn, and then because of that, sometimes trying to force things to try and make their maneuver, and that's when accidents can occur. And certainly any situation like that, or what's going on at the S-curve, are things that we want to try and address and correct if possible.
Another question.
I would also
related.
say,
Go
if
ahead.
I could, I would also say that 115 accidents in one location in Fairfax County is actually a pretty high number. We have very few locations in the county where we have that number of accidents.
Another question that's related to that are any fatal crashes?
I would have to check with our consultant team if they have data on that. I'm not aware of any offhand, but I don't know if Tim, you would happen to know, or Jessica.
No, this is Tim. Not offhand do I know if there's been any fatalities there of those 115.
Okay. The next question, why are you spending enormous amount of money for a short-term solution? Why do a short-term fix to a long-term problem?
Well, I mean, what we are talking about, you know, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as short term. I think it's more interim. It's something that we would hope would last until the long term, you know, the comp plan alignment could be implemented. So it would be something that could span a considerably long amount of time. It isn't cheap, although relative to some of the other options, it does seem to provide the most value for the dollar, just by comparison. We do think that it from a smart scale perspective could potentially provide a good benefit cost ratio.
Okay, the next question. Can you articulate the benefits of any improvements of the residents versus the benefits to the residents of Loudoun County? It says, to clarify, can you articulate the benefits of any improvements of the residents of Western Fairfax County versus benefits to the residents of Loudoun County?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the intent of the question is there, but I would say that any safety improvements like what we're talking about at either the S-curve or the Braddock-Oldley intersection are going to benefit whoever uses Braddock or Oldley. And so I don't think in that sense it discriminates whether you're from Loudoun or from Fairfax. I'm not sure if I'm addressing that question the way they were asking it, but I think that's probably the best I can respond.
Thanks, Andy. The next question, why not just do alternative number 1 to fix the safety issues? The traffic issue is not that bad for anyone who lives around here.
Yeah, and the tough part about this, again, it goes back to finding that balance. And even if we had some safety benefits from that particular option, it clearly was a poor option from an operations perspective. And we definitely don't want to potentially exacerbate the situation there, or leave it as it is, because we know there is an existing congestion problem there, and it wouldn't be an efficient use of taxpayer dollars to not fully address the issues that we're seeing out there.
The next question, why not just do the stoplight and then study the impact on traffic? We shouldn't be widening roads and expanding Loudoun County access to these roads without trying just a stoplight.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, and we do know that the single traffic light by itself is just not going to do the job from an operational perspective. And so further study it really isn't needed to determine that. We know that based on the analysis that we've done. I would just note, I think that question mentioned something about widening the roads. We are not widening the through capacity on Braddock. There are some turn lanes that we're considering, but the through capacity of Braddock in terms of the number of lanes is not changing, the number of through lanes.
The next question, will the public comments from this meeting be posted?
Yes, I believe not only that, but I believe we are recording this entire meeting tonight, and that will be posted and available online.
The next question, did you consider the long-term plan instead if it would end up resolving a long-term traffic problem?
Well, I think the long-term plan is still on the table. It's as we discussed, and I've still got slide 17 pulled up. It's not going away. It'll remain on the comprehensive plan. And so it's not going to be prevented from being implemented. But at this point in time, just given the amount of investment that's required, we do think it's a better, more interim investment to do what we've proposed with the jug handle and the S-curve improvements.
Andy, I know you talked about public input from the February meeting. There is a question on here that says, please explain what impact the public's voice had at the February 13th meeting, since nothing was changed from the presentation.
Well, this is kind of what we covered in slides 17 and 18. And, I also said up front, in terms of the feedback we got, as far as a preferred alternative from the public, the responses we got were fairly mixed. And so ultimately, after reviewing the feedback that we got from the public and weighing that against kind of the mixed response in terms of the alternatives, we came back to the staff preferred alternative as what we thought would be most appropriate to move forward with. And so that's how we ended up where we are. And it's not that we didn't hear what folks were saying. As I've listed here on the slide, we definitely heard what folks are saying, but there are some legitimate reasons why some of those options just wouldn't work realistically in this current situation.
The next question, this plan directs more traffic to the school. Have you considered the impact on the children?
Well, the plan that we are proposing, the preferred alternative, is going to make the intersections more safe. The intersection at Braddock and Old Lee, as well as the S-curve. And I think that's really kind of where we're coming from for this. And it will make the intersection a bit more efficient, but I don't see wholesale changes in terms of the traffic as a result of this project. Again, I would go back to the fact that this is largely a safety project, and I think that's a benefit to all users, including those children who are driving to school.
The next question, where's the analysis of the operational performance over the next 5 to 10 years?
So that's something I would ask perhaps Tim Ramey, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, actually, Ravi is our traffic engineer, would be able to discuss more about the short-term versus long-term operational improvements. But as Andy said, this is not a long-term improvement that it will satisfy to, the usual design year is 2045. It will take care of the majority of the traffic and operate in a good level, but it's not the ultimate improvement. I don't know, Ravi, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, this is Ravi here with the WSP. So we looked at the medium term. We looked at 2029, that is almost 6-7 years from now. And then we also looked at 2040 conditions. So we did looked at those 5 years or 10 years or even up to 11 years from the build out year. So we did looked at all those conditions.
Thank you both. The next one is about the meeting again tonight. says, what's the point of this meeting if you guys have already made up your mind as to what you plan to do? Like, why are we here? This is not good government.
Well, I certainly understand that some might have some frustration, but I can tell you that the reason that we wanted to come back out was to let folks know that a decision had been made as far as which option to submit for Smart Scale. And we felt it was our duty to come back out and let you know that. We wanted to also give you another opportunity to hear from us. We also know that we felt that there was a need to clarify a few things. And, we've tried to do that tonight in terms of how the study is wrapping up, and then, how a project would potentially proceed from here once funded, as well as the environmental studies that would occur with that. So really we wanted to come back out. We wanted to inform you all of the decision, and we wanted to let you know of how things could potentially move forward, and that there were definitely going to be additional opportunities for input as we potentially move into an actual project.
Thanks, Andy. The next one says, why did you pick alternative number 3 instead of a roundabout, which was used at Pleasant Valley and seems far better?
Yeah, and we kind of touched on this earlier, and it was about finding that balance, the balance between the costs, the impacts, and meeting the need. And we really felt that alternative 3 kind of fit that bill a bit better than the roundabout. The roundabout option was a bit more costly. It had more impacts, and I think with that option as well, and I think we're getting some feedback there, but I'll just keep going here. We also believe that option will impact the bridge over the Cub Run, which also adds significantly to the cost and has other impacts hydraulically, environmentally. So, that's why we ended up where we did.
Hey, I'm Andy. This is Nick Russ. I just would like to add and elaborate a bit more on that. Cost was certainly a reason. Roundabouts are more costly than the alternative that has been proposed. But and part of that is just due to the construction cost. It's a larger footprint. And Andy mentioned it also has an effect on the bridge. The bridge would need to, over Cub Run, would either need to be widened or rebuilt completely. So that makes the project also a roundabout option more expensive. Since it would affect the bridge over Cub Run, it increases the environmental impacts by pushing the project into Cub Run that alternative 3 avoids. It also brings into play the utility substations that's on the east side of Cub Run. Any widening along that location is just going to increase the project cost further because of utility impacts to that substation. The time to implement the project was also different. We were estimating that a roundabout would take 5 to 6 years to implement versus the 3 to 4 years to implement the junction handle option. So all those things combined have led to us recommending alternative 3 as the preferred alternative.
All right, thanks, Nick.
Thank you. The next one says, based on plans, Braddock Road will have a gradual gradient up from Old Lee to the S-curve. Is this correct? It continues with, this will negatively impact the entrance to the Chandley Farm neighborhood, with residents having to climb a hill and then making a left or right turn into heavy traffic. Can you address this issue?
Yeah, so I think there would be a slight grade going from Old Lee up to the S-curve. but you know, we would get into the details of those types of things as we get into design. And we would work through any potential issues for folks who live along there. We certainly would not want to create a condition or a situation which is hazardous or you know, unfavorable to anyone, you know, by any stretch. But those are things that would get worked out through more detailed design effort, and we're just not at that place yet.
Okay. Moving on to the next question, what participation do we have in the smart scale process?
Okay, so we did touch on this a little bit, but let me go back to the slide. It is, okay, slide 20, the next step slide. And as I was saying, you know, after localities apply, each of the applications go through a scoring and a prioritization process. And once that scoring and prioritization occurs, the CTB actually holds a public hearing on the potential smart scale projects. And that occurs in the spring. It'll be the April-May timeframe of next year. And during that public hearing, it's a perfect opportunity for the public to comment on the potential smart scale projects. And that feedback is taken in directly by the CTB, and they can consider that as they weigh their decisions. And then ultimately they will choose which projects to select in June of 2021.
And Andy, this is Tom Bashadny. If I could just expand just a little bit on that. So the CTB will have a public hearing here in Northern Virginia. It'll be at VDOT offices in West Docks Road, assuming we're beyond the pandemic. But historically, they've had a public meeting. But they also will have a public comment period, so people will be able to submit comments in writing as well. So both you know, a formal kind of in-person, assuming we're doing in-person, or a online public hearing, but then there'll also be opportunity to submit written comments during that process as well. So there'll be several ways that the community can provide feedback before the CTB acts on a final list of projects.
Thanks, Tom.
The next question, why wouldn't you wait till the 2022 cycle when you have more information and more studies can be done?
So, you know, at this point, we have sufficient information that the county could apply for the smart scale funds. Waiting another 2 years would not really gain us anything, because what we really need in order to move forward from here is project funding, and that project funding would allow us to do some of the additional studies like the environmental that some folks have mentioned, and move forward with that. And so, you know, that's why the county has decided to go ahead and submit the smart scale application now. But another reason is, you know, if they wait another 2 years, that just pushes the funding out another 2 years. And we really want to try and address this in the most efficient way that we can.
Waiting another 2 years would also increase the cost just from 2 years of additional inflation at a minimum too. So the project, whatever project is done here, is not going to get any cheaper by waiting for 2 years.
Absolutely, and we have seen, particularly recently, a trend in increasing costs of our projects, and so that is definitely an issue.
Okay, we have a couple of comments related to a jug handle. The first one, I am not in favor of the jug handle alternative and straightening of the S-curve I would like to see a more comprehensive plan that potentially cuts through Rock Hill part. Can you please share details, design details, for a Rock Hill Road connecting Braddock and Old Lee? If not, why?
Well, at this point, and this is the comp plan alignment, and so that alignment has not been developed to any degree. It has been included in the county's comprehensive plan, and I know there's been analysis to support making that connection, but from an engineering perspective, there's not been significant evaluation of that at this point. But we do have a good idea, just based on some of the work that our ADA for project development, Nick Roper, has done about the potential cost of that. And so we feel that we can make fairly informed decision as far as whether it makes sense to try and do something like that, or to do something on a more interim basis like what we're trying to pursue.
Andy, this is Tom again. If I could just add to that, implementing the comp plan alignment and going through a park is a very significant undertaking in terms of the impacts that alignment will have on the park. Just the work that was done for the roundabout at Pleasant Valley and Braddock, there were some park impacts that we had to take into account there. And that was a fairly significant effort just for a roundabout, let alone attempting to put a roadway essentially through the center of the park. There are significant environmental challenges that would be required to do that. So in addition to the cost of actually building that alternative, the environmental impacts would be much more significant than anything that's being talked about for the alignment on the options there with the improvements at Old Lee and Braddock.
Thanks, Tom.
To follow up, there's another question about the jug handle design. It says, could you share with us the success of the jug handle design in other locations and what locations use this design?
And I might ask our consultant team if they have any experience that they can draw from. I know just from having relatives in the New Jersey area that they have been used extensively in New Jersey and somewhat effectively. They're perhaps not as common around here, but they are in other areas, and they do seem to serve their purpose well. But Tim, I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to add.
No, I just agree that that it is used successfully in other parts of the area, New Jersey and so forth, and it makes sense here because you have a lot longer lane that you can provide for queuing for the jug handle, and then control those what would be left turn movements to through movements, which is a much more efficient way of directing the left turn movement. It essentially turns it into sort of a four-way type of intersection. So they are beneficial. They do work. It just takes one of the conflicting movements, the left turn movement, off the table at the signal. So that's all I can add at this point.
Thanks, Tim.
We have a couple more questions related to Smart Scale. The first one says, where can we see the Smart Scale?
Okay, so there is a Smart Scale website, and I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it's vasmartscale.org. And there's a ton of information there about the Smart Scale program itself. And then I believe they do have a public accessible database where you can look at prior Smart Scale projects. And then also, I believe at some point in this fall, they will release the submitted applications for the current round and allow you to at least view information about those as well. So yes, there is a public website for that, and perhaps one of the team could just double check that I got the web address correct on that, but I believe it is vasmartscale.org.
Andy, this is Nick Alexander at the county. You are correct.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and the next question about Smart Scale. Any of these options with submission to Smart Scale would take about 10 years. Are there any other options for funding that could move this along much quicker, even if temporary?
Well, this might be a joint answer if Tom wants to weigh in as well. From I think from a state perspective, Smart Scale is kind of our go-to funding program. The way it's structured for each cycle, it funds the fiscal years that are sort of on the outer edge of our 6-year plan, so the 5th and 6th fiscal years, and that's the way it's structured. So in this case, the funding would not be available until FY26. There are occasionally instances where money can be moved between projects and funding can become available earlier, but that is not necessarily the rule. And our best information right now would be that if it were funded, the earliest the funding would be available is FY26. Tom, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the size of this project is one of the things that kind of limits the number of pots of money that are available for something like this. We do have some pots of money that might be something under $1 million that could be done, could be achieved without too much trouble. And then there's a lot of other alternatives for big projects, projects that are 25 and million and up. This project kind of falls in the middle of that. It's not a small project, but it's not a big project either. So I would say that the county continues to look for funding opportunities for all of our projects, and it is possible that other funding opportunities might come up before 2026. If we see an opportunity that looks attractive for this project, we would definitely apply for it. So I wouldn't say that this is the only hope to fund this project, but it is probably, as we look at the funding sources today, it is probably the most practical hope at the moment. But there are changes in funding programs over time, and so there may be other opportunities in the meantime, and we'll continue to look for those.
Thanks, Tom.
What consideration is being given to homes directly along Braddock Road that will be impacted from the noise of all the traffic? For example, would a sound wall be installed? There is so much honking and screeching cars on Braddock Road.
Yeah, for sound walls, in order to qualify for sound walls, you do need to have a qualifying project. That is something that we would review as part of our environmental analysis and make a determination if that is something that needs to be considered. But if that essentially box is not checked in terms of it being a qualifying project, then that is not going to be an option. We do follow the the policy as set forth by the Federal Highway Administration when it comes to those things, and so we do follow that, and would be prescribed to adhere to that.
Okay, the next question. Will staff look at the impact of traffic on neighborhoods further down Braddock Road, given there may be more traffic from Loudon?
Well, as part of the project, I don't know that that would be looked at directly. If there was some sort of a tangential impact as a result of that, that could probably be looked at by our traffic engineering folks to see if there were some measures that could be taken to address that situation. But it is not something that I would necessarily think would be handled as part of this project.
But Andy, this is Tom again. As Nick mentioned earlier, assuming that the project is funded, when that funding becomes available, one of the first things that the design team will do is update all the traffic information for that current time frame. So if it's 2026, the traffic information will be updated to reflect whatever changes might have occurred. And that would also pick up any long-term impacts of the pandemic too. So whether it's growth in traffic because of things that may be happening in Loudon, or if it's a decline in traffic because, as was mentioned, telework is a more viable option in the future than it may have been in the past. So it will be important to update those traffic numbers when the project is actually funded.
On the slide showing the selected alternative, it says slide 16 or 17. Is all the land on county easements, or does it impact private property in Sully Estates?
Okay. So we're talking about this slide.
Based on the question, yeah, it says either slide 16 or 17.
Okay, and I might ask if our consultant team could speak to that, since they're a little closer to that information.
Yeah, again, these are very early on layouts of the roadway. The one impact to private property is where the actual jug handle is. That would have to be looked at and go through the right-of-way process. And however, the remainder of the road, we would need to get additional survey information, and again, we'd definitely minimize the impacts of right-of-way as we got the better information. So the one definite right-of-way impact to property is at the intersection in order to develop the jug handle.
And Andy, this is Tom. I do believe that we would also need right of way to address the S-curve piece. I don't believe that that's the straightening of the roadway is all in right of way. So I think there would be some right of way required there.
Yeah, and the shared use path itself, as currently shown, would require some right of way as well. Okay.
Okay, the next one says, where is the data? What is the scale used for the color scheme for the options?
Okay, are we talking about the alternatives?
That might be it. It doesn't specify. It might be the slide that you had that showed, yep, this one.
The matrix?
The matrix, that's what I'm thinking, because it says, what is the color scheme used for the options?
Okay, so the legend for that is included at the bottom of the slide. And so green is rated as good. The green and yellow stripes are good to fair, somewhat in between the good and the fair being yellow, and then red is poor.
Okay. The next question, where is the data to support claims regarding safety?
Well, so, and I'll ask our consultant team to weigh in on this as well. But, you know, obviously in addressing the S-curve itself, we know that that's going to just remove that issue entirely. That is largely going to go away. You know, with the intersection itself, by adding the signalized intersection, you know, we're also reducing the potential for conflicts with that. So the risk for those accidents that are occurring now is naturally going to go down. Now, obviously, you can't eliminate the potential for accidents 100%, but it certainly should reduce it quite dramatically. But Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think the signalization is the main benefit of making it a safer intersection. Going back to the question about the crashes, specifically at the intersection, 75% were property damage only, whereas 25% were injury crashes. So the signal will definitely reduce the overall number, but the signal would also reduce, I think, the type of crashes. So and separating the left turn movement to a through movement would also help on the safety issue at that intersection.
Okay, the next one, can you please confirm the deadline to submit comments? I believe the presentation stated October 12th. The news release states October 13th.
Okay, yeah, my understanding was that it was the 12th, but I will tell you that I think we can be fairly flexible on that. And if in another location we're showing the 13th, I don't see why we couldn't go with the 13th.
The next question, why would the speed be increased along Braddock Road after the changes?
Well, I don't know that we necessarily know if the speed would be increased. I know some folks are concerned about that. What I can say is that, you know, when it goes to design, we will certainly design the road at a design speed that is appropriate for the corridor and is consistent, and make sure that you know, we're following all applicable guidelines to make sure that it is a safe corridor to travel through. But you know, exactly you know, what the result of the improvements will be once they're implemented, that's something we would have to monitor.
But just to follow up on that, right now, most of the traffic is operating stop and go during the AM and PM peak because the traffic eastbound in the morning is waiting to make the left turn, and in the evening they're waiting to make the right turn. So if those two situations are addressed, the traffic will actually flow better than what it's doing today.
With all of this construction to the S-curve and Old Lee intersection, What will happen to the resident entrance of Sully Estates?
So again, a lot of these details will get worked out as we get into a project where there's actual design work being done. But I can assure you that we will look at all of those details once we get to that point. But at this point, it's too early to say kind of what exactly may or may not occur.
Okay, the next one we have. Okay, currently there is a no truck sign for turns from Old Lee to right on Braddock. Will this change after mods?
Yeah, so I think they're referring to the warning signs for truckers about the S curve. Obviously, if the S curve is no longer there, I think probably some changes to the signage would be appropriate. But we would have to look at that once we get again a little bit further along.
Once it is funded, it would be too late for us to have any public input. Is that true?
Actually, no. So again, the funding just gets the project started, and it would be at that point that we can initiate what's called preliminary engineering, which is essentially the design of the project. And as part of preliminary engineering, we have a full public involvement process, and that process includes public information meetings. It includes meeting with interested residents one-on-one or in a group if there's a group that's interested, and then ultimately that public involvement period culminates with a public hearing, and that's where we hopefully have gained consensus with the public in terms of what we're moving forward with, and at that point we would seek approval of the major design features of the project. But really, and that's not a short process. That's an involved process where we do go back out and interact on, with the public on a number of occasions. And so, definitely it would not be the end of that conversation.
Okay, we have a long question, so I'll read through it and let me know if I need to repeat any parts of it. A recommendation has been made at the Fairfax Board of Supervisors meeting to approve option 3 for the jug handle at Old Lee Road and modifications to the existing S-curve on Braddock Road as a 2-lane road, which does not follow the adopted Fairfax County Comprehensive Plan. The comp plan was altered initially to prevent Braddock Road east of the S-curve from becoming the main thoroughfare from the Loudoun County to the I-66/Route 28. In this alternative, there is no reason to add a 4-lane connector road where no other 4-lane road exists. Construction of option 3 will change the character of this rural road forever and negatively impacts those individual residents along Braddock Road due to increased volumes of commuter traffic from Loudoun County and points west. Why has this option as a 2-lane connector road not be reviewed more in detail as a solution? And Andy, let me know if I need to repeat that because I know that there was a lot in there.
So if I understood correctly, I think at the end they were asking why has the comp plan alignment not been reviewed as a 2-lane road?
Yes, why that option is not being reviewed as a solution in place of straightening the S-curve.
And Tom, I don't know if you want to start out in addressing this question.
Again, as we've mentioned earlier in the presentation, what the project that we've reviewed with you tonight is intended to do is address two safety problems, and in addition to that, improve operations. We are not saying that this is a long-term solution. It's more of an interim solution. It does not affect the comp plan alignment at all. That remains on the comp plan. When it was put on the comp plan, it was put on as a 4-lane road, and at some point, when there is funding to move forward with that option, there will need to be an evaluation of whether it needs to be a 2-lane road or a 4-lane road. That being said, the difference in cost between a 2-lane road and a 4-lane road isn't 50% of the cost. So the estimate is that a 4-lane road would be in the neighborhood of $70 million. A 2-lane road would not therefore be only $35 million. It would be somewhere in between, because you would still have to do many of the improvements, whether you're building a 2-lane road or a 4-lane road. That said, we don't have 35 million. We don't have 70 million, and we don't think that that project would compete well for the funding sources that we have available for that type of a project, at least not at this point. So the purpose of what we're talking about this evening is, can we make some interim improvements to improve safety in particular, and also improve operations? We're not adding capacity to Braddock Road, so it will remain a 2-lane road, just as it is today. And there are no plans to do anything other than a 2-lane road in that stretch of Braddock Road.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. So it is just after 8:30. Our target time for ending is about 8:30, and we do have a significant number of questions left. I think we would like to address a few more questions. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get through all of those this evening. As I mentioned earlier, we'll try and get back to folks that we don't get to tonight by email. And so just please know that if we don't get to your question, we will follow up by email in the coming days. So Sarah, I think we maybe take a few more questions and go from there.
Sure. The next one says, thank you for the hard work in improving this intersection. How are you accounting for the increase in traffic from the new Catholic high school?
Okay, and can you say that one more time, Sarah? It broke up a little.
Sure. It says, thank you for the hard work in improving this intersection. How are you accounting for the increase in traffic from the new Catholic high school?
Yeah, so, and Tim may be able to address this better than me, but, I believe in their forecast, they would have taken into account either a growth factor or future land use, which hopefully that would cover. But Tim, do you have anything specific that you want to say about that?
No, you're right in that we used a growth factor in order to predict or estimate future traffic based on the regional council of governments model for land use and the type of developments that are allowed out here. The new school was obviously an allowed development. However, we would, like we've been saying, in most cases, in all cases, we would update the traffic numbers, the existing traffic numbers, to account for that for that traffic that would be going to and coming from that new land use, that high school out there. Just as any other land use that might be developed, any other property that might be developed between now and when this project becomes a much more detailed project.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Tim. Sarah, shall we try for one more?
Sure. The next one says, would an environmental study ever result in termination of a project?
Well, I don't have direct experience with that. I'm sure that if there were not a way to mitigate or avoid impacts, and that was necessary, it could happen. But perhaps I know John Muse from our environmental staff is on the line. John, would you like to speak to that?
If
Yes,
not, Andy,
this is John Muse. Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. Yes, John Muse. Yeah, you pretty much covered that. The part of the environmental review process is to look at identifying what the resources are, and then working with design engineers to a process of avoidance and mitigation. Excuse me, of avoidance and minimization, and then working with the regulators as well. And if there's anything that could be mitigated for, that would be for unavoidable impact. So there are cases where that happens, but probably where you're getting into more like new alignment type issues, and these aren't really new alignment options that are being discussed tonight.
And Andy, if I would just respond a little bit to that as well. We actually do have an example in Fairfax County, a road that was originally called the Lockheed Van Dorn connector down in the southern part of Fairfax County, that had been on the county's comp plan for decades. And we were not able, not me personally, but the county, my predecessors were not able to address the environmental impacts of that project on Huntley Meadows, and as a result, the project was in fact canceled. So, yeah, the answer is yes. There are instances where environmental impacts cannot be overcome. Whether or not this is one of those, I think, is an open question. But there are examples here in Fairfax County where projects did not move forward because they could not address the environmental impacts.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tom, and John as well. So at this point, we are now well past 8:30, and as I mentioned, there are quite a number of questions remaining, which we won't be able to get to, unfortunately, this evening. But we will follow up with folks directly and provide responses to their questions by email. And we'll be doing that over the coming days as we get the time to do that. But I did want to just check and see, Tom or Supervisor Smith or Nick, are there any final comments that you'd like to make before we wrap things up?
Hi, this is Kathy. I want to thank everybody for all the questions. I think it was great information that got out there. And I think it's good because now people can see that this is a process and there are other opportunities for them to get involved. So thank you, everybody, and thank you all the staff that provided the answers.
Thank you.
And I would just add the same. I would want to thank everybody for their participation. We had a good group, probably about 80 people at one point. And so we do appreciate you taking the time to provide your feedback. That feedback is important on any of the projects that we're developing here in Fairfax County.
Great. Well, and on behalf of VDOT, I do also want to express my thanks to everyone who attended this virtual public information meeting. We are still trying to get the hang of these and are working through the kinks, but we appreciate you bearing with us, and absolutely appreciate your feedback and your questions, and we will be following up again with those of you that we didn't get to shortly. But thank you again very much. Appreciate it.